MakeReal specialises in creating immersive learning solutions across a range of technologies. To download their latest academic paper on how to turn learners into activists, visit makereal.co.uk/activists. Hi, this is John Helmer here, welcoming you to a bonus episode of The Learning Hack. This time we're featuring one of our favourite learning podcasts, Video Learning Lab. The podcast is hosted by Kevin Elster, who runs an innovative video learning company called Synesthesia, which uses lifelike AI-generated avatars as presenters. We're going to get Kevin on The Learning Hack to talk about that very soon, but in this podcast he interviews me. He wanted to know what I'd picked up from running my two podcasts about how best to design learning. We also explored what other insights I might have gleaned over the many years working in communications and also in the creative arts. In case you didn't know, I was in a top 10 band, had a novel published, and wrote and appeared in a series of comedy mini-musicals on Channel 4 in the UK. Due to a technical glitch, the interview got a bit truncated, but if you desperately need that last 5 minutes, you can listen to Kevin's channel on YouTube or Spotify, link in show notes. Hope you enjoy.
My guest today is a showrunner and host of the incredible podcast, The Learning Hack, and another great production, Great Minds on Learning. I'm excited to chat with him today. John Helmer, welcome.
Welcome to you, Kevin. Thanks very much. I'm really pleased to be here.
Absolutely. So I was getting my day started, as I have been for the past few months, with your podcast, The Learning Hack, and I love not only the programming and the guests that you bring, but also you have a really great energy and a way to make relevant topics in the learning and industry entertaining. Even just getting fired up, listening to your intro reminded me a lot of, and I hope you know this person, Bill Nye the Science Guy. That's what The Learning Hack reminds me of. You know, it's a great intro. It's a great way to start my day. I think I'm curious for you, where the idea for The Learning Hack came from. Why was it important for you to create The Learning Hack?
We started about 2019, which because it's on the other side of the pandemic, doesn't it? Was kind of my latest redundancy. Mostly I work as a freelance consultant. Then people decide that they want to give me jobs to get me inside the firewall, and then the company gets bought up by another company, as inevitably happens in Learn Tech, and I got made redundant. And people said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know, I'll go back to consulting, I suppose. And they said, well, listen, you ran this 60-page glossy magazine that you were doing for the company, and it was full of interviews, and you seem to be good at interviewing. And we think you've got a nice voice. Why don't you do podcasts? So I thought about that for a year, and then I started the podcast. And I didn't have much idea what to do, apart from the fact that, having been in the Learn Tech industry for quite a while, I had a pretty good black book. And I talked to a lot of interesting people, and I just got my little portable recorder and went out and started recording conversations with them, and then started selling advertising, which I thought that happened remarkably quickly. In fact, with the first one, I had a sponsor.
Wow!
So I thought, well, this is great. I mean, it's not lucrative, Don't get too excited, folks. Rates in podcast advertising are pretty low. You can't really live on it. But it certainly defrayed a certain amount of the expense, and so that's how I got started. And then the second one came along because I had a long association with Donald Clark. He used to be my boss at a content creation company called Epic. I worked back in the noughties as his head of marketing, and we'd known each other a lot over the years. And he had this blog, and he, I can't remember who came up with the idea, but we thought, why don't we turn this into a podcast? And he has a blog which, I should say, covers learning theory from the Greeks to the geeks, 2,500 years of learning theory. He would regularly do conference talks on this theme as well, which kind of brought the house down. So it was pretty much there was indications there that this would be a popular thing, and it has to prove to be that.
I'm curious, how you go about getting to design a learning podcast? Because it's not a typical format that we see in e-learning. It's, taking honing in on a particular relevant topic, but then you also embed, there's obvious instructional design that goes into the podcast and each episode, whether that's the opening monologue and finding a focus and a theme, but also, the way that you've designed it. You have the before each episode, at the beginning of each episode, is a head of fact where you provide a lot of context, a head of themes, and it's like a reimagining of learning objectives. And just curious, how do you go about selecting the topic, and then how did you go about designing the format of this particular learning experience?
Well, I don't know. I think perhaps you're giving me more credit than I really deserve.
Yeah.
The instructional design that goes into the construction of our podcast is zero. They're podcasts about learning. They're not learning podcasts. Those two things are very different. One of my recent interviewees is a guy for a company called Assemble U, Richard Lacey, and they make actual learning podcasts, which can, in theory, run from a learning management system and have in an LMS alongside other types and formats, including video. And they are done on strict instructional design principles, and they're much shorter. They're kind of like 10 minutes, whereas I do these very long, rambly ones. I suppose the formats that I looked at in defining the formats of our podcast were more kind of media related. And, I have a background in a creative background. I was in a band for 10 years, in another one where we did a series of television musicals for Channel 4, a British channel that was starting up at the same time. And I've written a novel that was published. So I'm kind of more familiar with that world in a way than the world of ID. But they do have a lot in common. There's a lot of overlap. When it comes to the head of fact, head of themes thing, I was really looking at kind of British TV shows, which, your US listeners wouldn't necessarily know, but I admired Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, that kind of format. And we had a thing called the MASH report, which got canned over here. And there are various other things. There is kind of documentary format. I'm a big admirer of Adam Curtis and so on. So all those things fed into it. But I suppose having been in learning for like 20 years, a lot of that ID must have kind of rubbed off at some point. I know that you can't talk for ages and ages like I'm doing now. That brain needed a rest. So we put in stings at regular intervals just to give people a, kind of wake up moment and so on. Occasionally we do little recaps as well, which is good instructional practice.
Exactly, yeah.
Someone learns something from the podcast, and we know that people learn a great deal from Great Minds on Learning especially. But it's not consciously designed with Ebbinghaus principles in mind, I have to say. There's a degree of repetition that comes into it, which is because Donald and I are getting on a bit, I suspect. But that helps with your Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. But it's kind of instinctive in a way, and we're led by our interest, and I'm certainly led by my interest. I don't want to have any boring people on the podcast, I'm afraid. And I think that's important. Keeping things fresh, keeping things engaging can be a bit underestimated in learning because it can get a bit worthy.
I'm curious how the show evolved, kind of where did you start and where were the major kind of design evolutions in the episode to make it to make the show kind of the format that it is now?
I think it did kind of evolve bit by bit, but if I listen to the first one again, in a way, it's kind of all there immediately. I knew you had to have had to kind of grab people's attention, but I worked in marketing before I worked in learning, and I've done a lot of marketing jobs, and I'm still a communications consultant for learn tech firms. So the principles that are really kind of embedded in me are the ADA thing. Attention, get their attention, get their interest, excite desire or decision of some sort. Yes, I'm going to watch the rest of this thing, and then action at the end, get them to do something else, set up to our Patreon or whatever. So that's embedded with it. a thing that evolved was the cold front. This is a kind of technical term which people working video will be aware of. Is that cold front is where you just start straight in, blah blah blah. I'm going to tell you this week about whatever with that, and then you go to the title music or whatever. And I think that's something that comes out of the marketing background. How can I do something which is 3 or 4 seconds, which is grabby, that's maybe 30 seconds, which is grabby and is going to bring people in and make them get past the first bit of it. Then you have your kind of title theme music, and I get into the bit where I introduce a bit more seriously the theme of the episode. And then again, that's a sort of slightly longer piece, perhaps more considered. And that gets us to the head of fact thing, where which really is a device to get some really boring stuff out of the way in a slightly joke. This is a fake newsroom type of way. And the head of fact just gives the biog. We get that from LinkedIn. Sometimes we don't like it, so we rewrite it, or we have to get up the web, whatever. And then the head of themes is really there just to be kind of rude about my lack of skills and so on. To give a bit of humour to it, but also to give another flavour of what's going to come up. Because there is a thing in instructional design. I know I'm going to tell you what we're going to teach you about.
Yes.
And at the end of it, then I tell you what I'm teaching you about. At the end, I tell you what I taught you about. That stuff people use all the time as an instructional device. So we kind of do that with the themes. This is what it's going to be about. But all the time, it's trying to excite the desire for people to want to listen to the whole thing. Yes, you're going to tell me about AI. Brilliant. I've never heard about that before. I'm gagging to know, and by the time we got to that point, it's kind of hit the music for, all right, so now the interview begins.
Yeah. So what's nice that you're mentioning is you bring the engagement right up front, where you're dropping somebody immediately into the learning, giving them a taste of what's to come, but still having it be informative. I think this goes kind of opposite to how the e-learning experiences that I've taken, or different instruction, where it seems that they want to load the logistics up front. They want to make sure that they're stating the purpose, or what's to be learned, often in what feels like the driest way possible, by putting the objectives on screen. It's almost like instructional design gets its own in its own way, where we're focused on good instructional practice and less on engagement. What are some of the other obstacles that you see that keep us kind of from innovating in that learning space, or making it more engaging?
I know exactly what you mean there. I mean, that's a really good question. So many things big, and it's not just e-learning packages that have all that very tiresome housekeeping and throat clearing at the beginning. You get it with webinars as well. And, I very often log on to webinars because I think I'm going to learn something from them. And I'll kind of do my emails for the first 10 minutes while they're all, because that bit is very boring. So the real intention of what I described with everything that we do at the beginning of the learning hack is to animate the throat clearing and the housekeeping, to give it a kind of jokey form. Like, we know you're bored with this stuff, we got to do it.
Yeah.
So that it draws people in. And so straight away, they're not in a thing where, I can go to sleep now for 5 minutes, because your brain does that when it's like, now we're going to show you the learning objectives and go through those in horrible detail while, your engagement just kind of dribbles out.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's something that I don't know a huge amount about instructional design. I've worked with a lot of instructional designers. Obviously, I've done Great Minds on Learning thing and seen all the literature. I know that in some companies, content creation companies, there's a rather slavish adherence to things like the Gagne's 9 points of instruction. And if you follow those too slavishly and without working to kind of bring it to life, you end up with a very dull beginning to things. And, and then e-learning programs can get very samey because, learning designers move from one company to another and they take the same practice with them. And there isn't necessarily a head of learning design who has the time to pour creativity into each new program, so that they get a bit formulaic.
Yeah.
That is inimical to learning, because as Nick Shackleton-Jones says in his book, How People Learn, the affective domain is really important in learning. You can't learn anything unless you care about it. So your first duty really is to make people feel that it's worth learning about this stuff, or even hearing about this stuff, or even listening to you. You have to kind of grab them by the buttonhole in some way.
Yeah. And then I guess, do you have any, because each episode of the Learning Hack does come across as useful, and I think that's at the basis of what we do is what's being discussed, or is this new bit of knowledge, is it going to help me with a task that I have to complete? Is it going to help me learn something more about learning sciences? But the engagement kind of seems to be designed in hand with that. And after speaking with all these folks, are there, I guess, what are some of the big trends that keep popping up, or whether that's the cycle, the problems that L&D keeps falling back into, or what are some of the trends and topics that you notice?
Yeah, I mean, there are perennial things, and it's a challenge not to, because they're important things very often. I mean, one thing that's come out again and again, or come out of Great Minds on Learning as well as the Learning Hack, is learning is a process. It's not an event. Thing in event. With all due respect to video, which has a really important part in the kind of toolbox of skills you can use for a learning program.
Yeah.
It's not it. You're not going to get, unless it's you want to do something like learn how to tie a bow tie, then straight to YouTube. And
yes,
yeah, a kind of micro skill, as it were, brilliant for that. But the event itself isn't going to do it. The learning happens, in a sense, after the learning program's over. That comes up again and again. And another thing is you talk particularly about L&D, the position of L&D within the organisation. Very conscious of that, because I just did an interview with Michelle Parry Slater.
Mm-hmm.
She's written a very good book, the L&D Handbook.
Yes.
And she has an interest in organisational design, organisational development, rather, and the context of use. That is, I did a whole series of interviews called Talking to the Business for a client, where I talk to people in companies of different sizes about how they get on with the business. The place of L&D within the organisation is one that comes up again and again. So it's has a few image problems. And,
yeah. I think in particular, I remember, I think we'd spoken a ways back about the role in D, and how in particular L&D does have a marketing problem where we see ourselves as vital to the business. We're able to service business problems, but our interventions, whether they're in systems and environment, or whether in the courses or tools that we create, it's something that I know that we have difficulty getting the word out about, or we think that if we create this intervention, people will come to it, and being able to market ourselves out is a skill that we're missing, whether that's calling attention to a campaign that you're running, or making sure that you are marketing your projects within the organization itself. I'm wondering if given your extensive marketing background, is there anything that we can learn, or that we can start doing, so we can make sure that our campaigns are landing, or that they have the right support, or that they'll run through all the way to completion?
This is the third thing that comes up again and again.
Yeah.
And people, perhaps it's just because people ask me, but what can training learn from marketing?
Yes.
And I think it's a real double-edged sword. I think there are some marketing techniques which are really important for learning people to learn. Now that everything has put things online, you start creating digital products online. You need to know about these marketing principles, and the important things are around engagement, memorability, which advertising people are very good at, and the sense of time, the way that you use time. And this is more really a thing to do with the creative arts, how in a something like a video, or over the course of a podcast or a piece,
mm-hmm.
sculpt the time, as it were, during that. But to come back,
Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean about sculpt the time?
yeah, I'm kind of slightly getting off the subject of marketing here, more to what I've learned from my kind of background, creative background. There is a big creative input into learning nowadays, especially if you're creating a video. It's a creative act, you know. Even if you're writing a blog, whatever. And what I've learned from that, it's very much about kind of controlling the ebb and flow of time. I'm seeing that phrase "sculpting of time" in a very pretentious way from one of my favorite filmmakers, Andrei Tarkovsky, who wrote a book called Sculpting in Time, because he believes that's what films are about, is sculpt in time. And they are an object lesson, his films, in that, because they stretch the elastic of your attention to the point and beyond the point of boredom, in a way that's quite extraordinary, and yet you sit through it. And then suddenly there's this big event that absolutely knocks you sideways, and it's a deliberate technique. Only he could get away with it, I think. But it does make you think about how we use time, how we experience time within a story. And that thing that I was talking about earlier of doing a cold front that's, say, 30 seconds, then an introduction that's, say, 45 seconds, and bits like that, the bits of time get longer. You have to be really conscious of that. If you watch a movie, you know all about this instinctively, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to explicitly say it. But movies tend to be chunked into 5 20-minute segments, and something happens at the end of those segments, at each segment, that propels you on to the next bit. And screenwriters are very familiar with all this stuff, and there is a big literature about it. So anyone who engages with kind of long-form creative content, or even short-form creative content, you listen to an English pop single of the 80s, get your stopwatch out, the chorus will arrive at exactly 1 minute into a 3 minute. And I've had a hit single. I've worked with commercial producers, and they do that. I think everyone who works in the creative industries have heuristics around lengths of time.
It's like the midpoint of a film. The midpoint of the film is in the story where the protagonist probably is. It seems like it's their lowest point. They've run into the big problem that it seems like they won't be able to overcome it, and then the expectation is that you're going to over the remaining half of the film, they're going to overcome that, and you're going to watch the rest of that journey. But everything up until that midpoint is leading up to the halfway mark. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think this, after when you watch so many films and TV box sets as I have, it gets a bit wearying, because you feel you're just trotted like little ponies through the traces. Now, when you make the break from that and you go to an art house movie like the Tarkovsky stuff, on the other hand, you kind of sit there and think, what's going on? It's supposed to sit here and watch this wooden barn in the forest burn down in real time.
Yes,
going on, because we are so used to that, and we're kind of, without getting into the hidden persuaders stuff and conspiracy theories and Adam Curtis, all the rest of it, we have been conditioned to for our attention spans to work in that kind of way. 20 minutes is a reasonable time for attention span, but in lesson planning with a teacher, they tend to be kind of 40 minutes. You've probably got about half an hour of active time. 20 minutes is as long as you can hold people's attention on complex subject before they need some kind of breather or break. You might need to throw a board rubber at someone's head, or
I think that's the crux of a lot of I keep coming back to e-learning, because that's a place I'm more familiar with, but and where e-learning seems to miss out is that they tend to add more and more content, or things that require more and more attention the later on in the course. How much you're giving somebody at a particular moment in their course, and whether or not they're engaged at that pace, or else you'll probably lose them.
When you talk about those, the way that in a creative piece of work you sculpt time, in learning it's completely different, because what you're trying to do is different, and here's where the difference between marketing and training comes in. that, with AIDA structure, which is a marketing heuristic, attention, interest, desire, action, the first part of that is really useful. The second half is really different because there's no buy button on the program. You're trying to do something very different. And in fact, we really ought to be careful with this word learning, because it's been heavily abused in our industry, but also it covers a huge number of different things. In one sense of learning, yes, the Great Minds on Learning is a learning podcast, because you'll learn something from it. You'll know something at the end of it you didn't know before. Whether you remember it or not, I'm not sure. That would rely on you to carry on with your learning and go and read one of the books or something like that. There's this thing, the Ebbinghaus curve, that I've written a white paper about, and people are probably fairly familiar with, that if the type of learning that you're doing is that you want to embed a knowledge really securely in people's heads so they can then go and practice it where they really learn it, you need to make sure that you escape the Ebbinghaus curve, which, after 20 minutes, you've forgotten 50% of what you've heard, after another half an hour, a bit more, the next day, less remains. So your kind of recaps in a learning program and your wake up points are really important, because you're dealing there with a kind of, not so much a kind of rule of thumb heuristic as a movie maker or a screenwriter would. You are dealing with something which is scientific, which is how do we, and it's in the literature, it's, how do we escape that? And then there are other things come into it, like cognitive load. So, you go to see a film like Everything Everywhere All at Once, it is cognitive overload. It just comes at you like that, and you come out of that cinema feeling exhausted. You've learned nothing. A learning program like that would teach you absolutely nothing because of cognitive overload. If the cognitive load is too high, and this is in the work of Sweller, I think, then the information just doesn't go in. And it's one of the reasons that when you look at people like kind of Rich Clark, Mayer, and so on, Nassim Reeves, and you focus on how you ought to structure learning content as opposed to entertainment or artistic content, it's about really keeping it simple. You don't necessarily want text on the screen at this point at the same time as the audio. What is the relationship between images and audio? And it's an interesting thing with podcasts, that it's such a useful medium for learning, because you strip out the visual element. The point there is that the two are very different things, and it's when you look at the kind of back end, if you like, of a learning intervention that really the science comes into play.
So two things that I was thinking about is, one is, you're talking about making sure that we differentiate from marketing best practices, AIDA, and learning design. I think that there's something to be there's something to be even more borrowed from the marketing principles, especially focusing on that action, getting somebody to take action. I think that with learning, a lot of it is the learning that is not as useful or not perceived as useful is the learning that's not used at the end of the course. You're not going to drive performance if somebody doesn't change their behavior or their actions when they come up to a certain problem. And so I think I would argue that maybe we can still use AIDA, but maybe configure that last A a little bit differently, where you should be using your e-learning to drive action. And it should always, one of the things that we always coach folks on who are creating video learning is that you should end with a call to action, whether that's it could be, read this book, or it could be email your manager your response on this particular, your response to this scenario, having them apply something as a means of driving action. So that's just one thing that I would push back on, that maybe we need to be a bit more urgent in learning if we want to really focus on impact more immediately, rather than, just in case you have this information, you should think about it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're absolutely right there that you need to get people to go beyond just the learning program. It doesn't end at that moment because what happens is so important. So I mean that's a good corrective. I think it is worth emphasizing though the difference in intention
Mm-hmm.
with what we're trying to do. With marketing, with particularly with advertising, you're just trying to get people to buy stuff. It draws on science as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite well documented how Freud's um, relative Bernays came to America and taught people how to excite the drives and the desires so that Madison Avenue could start turning us all into desire-driven consumers. And that is the aim of marketing. It's to sell you stuff. Training uses the same psychology, the same brains, the same squelchy stuff, but there will come a difference that marketing's really quite amoral. They just want to get you to buy the stuff. With a training program, what you're trying to get people to do might be to do the right thing.
Mm.
Now, marketing isn't about getting people to do the right thing most of the time, unless you're you're working in an advertising agency that's working on behalf of the government that's trying to tell people how to cross the road without getting run over. Then you start to fall into learning, really.
Well, I think a distinction that I'm picking up from your explanation is maybe where marketing, the once the person has purchased the item, the goal is complete, the job is done. Whereas in learning, maybe it's you want them to take actions to create new behaviors and habits, but it's really about, like you said, learning is not just a one shot. It's not about one particular moment. It's about changing the way that we make decisions. And so that action should be in service of, someone's further professional development, where they come up to a problem, they're able to make decisions using that action, but also correcting sort of the way that they're thinking.
Obviously, it's about looking beyond the content piece.
Yes.
And looking into the context abuse and, the workflow. And so on. Addiction's a terrible thing, but it's at one end of a spectrum of obsessive behaviors that another end of that spectrum is very useful. That if you look at kind of compliance training, how can we make sure that every time a person does this task, they will do that step. They will not leave that step out. They will not get the company fired, the company made bankrupt, or themselves fired. They won't cause injuries to their fellow workers and so on. So you're caught up in this thing of, as I say, a spectrum. You don't want addiction, but you kind of want people to be addicted to the right process or to the right behaviors or to doing the job properly. And so you're swimming in the same space all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think the kind of intentionality is different. I mean, training technology tends to lag behind marketing quite a bit. Marketing technology tends to lag behind porn technology.
Yes.
Marketing's dirty little fingerprints that,
yes.
What happens in porn today will happen in general marketing tomorrow because it's to do with the technology adoption curve. And training is at the back of that kind of queue in a way. It moves slower because it has to be, because the intention is really to make lives better and safer for people at work, rather than to encourage their kind of narcissism and bad drives.
So maybe then the problem to tackle that I see from a training and learning perspective is that a lot of what we do is push, where we say, this is what you need to learn now. This is important. When you run into this problem, do this instead. And so we're often pushing things onto people, whereas I feel like marketing is more of the pull, where it's like the opportunity to do something. It's you didn't even know this problem, and it's kind of affecting change without kind of, you can't force someone to buy something. So it forces marketing to be a bit more creative about how they target their audience and how they define what it is, that action or that decision they're trying to change. And so what are some different ways that we can communicate with our audience to make I wouldn't say make those learning and performance objectives stick. What is the engagement that we can do up front to build that desire to change?
Of course, there is a lot of push in marketing, and we call it spam. It's kind of but yeah, I mean, brand is all about.
We don't have that luxury in learning, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, brand is all about pull, and people have talked about having a powerful learning brand, and people have done work on their learning brand within organizations that gives a degree of pull. The important thing up front, and this is where video comes in, I think, is that you can help people to care about the subject, and you can give that pull if you create kind of relatable video. You might have, I've seen a lot of good examples of this. We want people to care about this so that they'll do the compliance learning. We put a little video up the front. We throw a lot of kind of money and creative effort, a certain amount of money and creative effort into getting that video right. We hire actors and so on, so that you've got something, a scenario, say if you're in a healthcare context, where you can excite people's emotions, and it becomes relatable. It's empathetic with their context of use. If you can get that right, that is a kind of massive win in terms of engaging people in a piece of learning, which will later become slightly drier. But it's getting the pull in there rather than pushing, as you say. Anyway, and this comes out again in Great Minds on Learning. William James, Aristotle, Augustine of Hippo, just to name a few, drop a few big great minds' names, all have this emphasis on, we are not taught, we learn. The learner can only learn for themselves with the aid of teachers. It's not a matter of the teacher forcing information into their heads. It's a matter of them kind of, being drawn into to being interested and engaging with the subject. Plato thought that learning was rediscovery of something that we really knew all along.